Hello, my name is Meg Perret, and I'm a PhD candidate at Harvard History of Science and Gender, Women, and Sexuality Studies. This talk is titled Chemical Castration, White Genocide, and Male Extinction in the Rhetoric of Endocrine Disruption. In 2002, biologist Dr. Tyrone Hayes conducted a series of experiments that revealed that the most common herbicide, atrazine, feminized male frogs at concentrations below that which is allowed in drinking water in the US. He hypothesized that atrazine works as an endocrine disrupting chemical, converting testosterone to estrogen in frogs. Hayes' research ignited an ongoing political controversy over whether atrazine causes reproductive abnormalities such as hermaphroditism in amphibians, humans, and other species. Although the manufacturer of atrazine, Syngenta, argues that the pesticide is safe, Hayes and other scientists have increasingly demonstrated a link between atrazine and threats to the public health and environment. In this talk, I examined the role of gendered rhetoric in scientific and popular representations of this controversy. Through analyzing depictions of Hayes frogs in scientific research and the media, I find that atrazine discourse is imbued with cultural anxieties about the extinction of normative masculinity in an increasingly toxic world. This talk contributes a surprising account of how this rhetoric travels into far-right media commentary about male decline and white genocide. Hayes et al.'s 2010 highly cited scientific paper found that atrazine-exposed males were, quote, chemically castrated, close quote, meaning that they could not reproduce as biological males or had other abnormalities such as decreased testosterone levels, reduced sperm production, or suppressed mating behaviors. 10% of the population became, quote, atrazine-induced females that were completely feminized as adults, close quote. They reproduced as biological females, quote, mated with control males and produced viable eggs, close quote. A photograph in the 2010 article shows that two frogs in amplexus, the mating position of frogs, where one frog clasps the lower back of the other. As the article explains, the photograph depicts one of the, quote, sex-reversed genetic males, close quote, who became, quote, reproductively functional females, close quote. Hayes et al. 2010 references a study of endocrine disruptors on human cell lines by Sanderson et al. 2000 to conclude that atrazine likely caused, in the words of the reference study, inappropriate sexual differentiation in wildlife and other humans. Rather, in other wildlife and humans. At a research conference, Hayes remarks that he chose the term, quote, chemical castration, close quote, specifically because it angered Syngenta representatives. His word choices indeed made attention-grabbing headlines. A National Geographic article opens with Hayes et al.'s photo captioned, quote, the so-called pregnant man has company, one of the most common weed killers in the U.S., can transform male frogs into fully functional females, a new study say. A Science article included the same photo stating, quote, some chemically castrated guys developed into egg-laying gals, in which they exhibit girly behavior. The article continues that Hayes's male frogs, quote, not only became submissive like females, but also apparently sent come-hither signals to the bros in their tank, close quote. These, quote, transgender animals became male mothers, close quote, who allowed males to fertilize their eggs, which grew into offspring. Popular science coverage of Hayes et al. Appeals to cultural disgust for male bodies that transgress gender norms and to cultural anxieties about transgender people passing as cisgender. These representations perpetuate transmisogyny, a term that feminist theory describes as discrimination against trans women who are impacted by both transphobia and misogyny. Scholars in queer ecologies, a subfield that explores the intersection of queer theory and environmental studies, have probed how representations of endocrine disruption in popular culture are imbued with normative judgments about the desirability of human sexual variability. Noel Sturgeon argues that popular science depictions of wildlife often propagate heteronormative ideals of the reproductive nuclear family in the context of the changing global environment. Giovanna Di Ciro uses the term econormativity to describe how environmental politics draw on people's fears that exposure to endocrine disruptors destabilize the normalness and naturalness of masculinity, femininity, and heterosexuality. Madeleine King and Eva Hayward likewise demonstrate that the discussion of surrounding endocrine disruptors portrays human sex, particularly the male sex, as under siege, endangered, and threatened. Analysis involving endocrine disruption often rely on heterosexist conceptions of women, people with disabilities, queer people, and others with non-normative embodiment as deviant, impure, or contaminated. Like previous researchers in queer ecologies, I find that representations of haze frogs and the futures they imply for humans encode cultural anxieties about the queering of normative schemas of gender, sex, and sexuality. This essay contributes novel analysis of how gendered rhetoric of endocrine disruptors translates into discourses of the contemporary alt-right. For example, far-right rhetoric in the US has also featured Hayes' 2010 findings. American conservative radio host and conspiracy theorist Alex Jones released a series of videos on atrazine's feminizing effects. In Alex Jones Comes Out of the Closet as a Gay Frog, he wore a full-body frog suit, green face paint, and a pink tutu. In the video, he drinks from a bottle labeled atrazine and pronounces, "Thanks to atrazine, there will be no more frogs, but we are gay, so that's cool," and "I'll never have children, and I'm sterilized, but the media says I'm totally cool, I'm a gay frog."
Look at me, I'm a gay frog. I'm so cool, I'm so neat. I'll never have children and I'm sterilized. But the media says I'm totally cool. I'm a gay frog. I'm a gay fish. It's so good. And I think my daddy atrazine. Shocked by it, so I'm up here bashing it because I don't like gay people. I don't like them putting chemicals in the water that turn the friggin' frogs gay. Do you understand that? Serious crap. Thanks to atrazine, there'll be no more frogs. But we're gay, so it's cool. Thanks, atrazine.
Jones rants that the government developed a gay bomb to control the population through rampant homosexuality, a statement that circulated on the internet as the gay frog conspiracy theory or the gay bomb rant. A video excerpt where Jones yells that the water is poisoned with chemicals that are making the frickin' frogs gay went viral, with nearly 600,000 views and 1,200 comments on Twitter within 6 months. The hashtag #GayFrogs circulated among far-right followers on 4chan and Reddit, sometimes illustrated with the Pepe the Frog meme, a meme co-opted by the alt-right and officially recognized as a hate symbol associated with Nazism and white supremacy. Later, in 2020, Alex Jones stated on his TV show that atrazine will, quote, "shrink your son's genitals," close quote. In an uncharacteristically sober manner, he elaborates, quote, "Soon males will have genitals the size of a female's clitoris in about 2 generations with current atrazine levels. If you like your son not having a cock, then you're going to love atrazine," close quote. Jones cites a Berkeley News article on Hayes and colleagues' 2010 research and state that males exposed to atrazine, quote, won't be able to have sex since they don't have a penis and will die, close quote. He alleges the possibility of human extinction due to increasing homosexuality from a government chemical warfare operation involving adding chemicals to tap water to reduce the number of children. Atrazine, he says, is a chemical weapon used by globalists who are, quote, hitting us chemically to attack and take out our species. Besides their rampant transmisogyny, far-right depictions of environmental issues are coated with concerns over perceived decline of white male social dominance. Scholars in masculinity studies have argued that a narrative of white male decline emerged in the U.S. in the 1960s and 1970s with the rise of identity-based social movements, including the civil rights movement and women's liberation. In popular discourse, as feminist literary scholar Sally Robinson describes, the white male victim emerged as an emblem of the crisis of white masculinity. White masculinity became culturally constructed as victimized, traumatized, and wounded. Jones portrays male decline in terms of feminization of male genitalia, which he equates with the death of men and ultimately of our species. Feminist science studies scholars view this as an example of the broader phenomena of casting white male decline in biological terms. Like many on the far right, Alex Jones subscribes to white genocide conspiracy theory, a white supremacist belief that immigration, low fertility rates, abortion, and miscegenation are causing the decline or even extinction of white people. Jones' online news organization InfoWars is instrumental in spreading racialized fears of white decline, fears rooted in 19th century eugenics and whose latest articulation is described as white extinction anxiety. Critical theorists of today's far-right movement in the U.S. argue that whites associated with the far right often respond to the country's changing racial landscape by embracing the white male victim ideology, in which whites face racial discrimination, denial of cultural rights, and stigmatization for racial pride, all of which threaten the continued existence of the white race. As feminist political theorist Betsy Hartman writes, ecofascism, the dangerous intersection between environmentalism and white supremacy, is a greening of hate in which concern for the environment is co-opted as a ruse for increased control over women's reproductive capacities, surveillance of racial minorities, and securing the borders against immigration. Although Hayes would likely be uncomfortable with marshalling environmental pollution as evidence of white male decline, Jones's 2020 claim that atrazine will shrink your son's genitals shares rhetorical similarities with Hayes' 2010 rhetoric of chemical castration. Both Jones and Hayes emphasize the feminization of male bodies and inability of those affected to reproduce as biological males, as undermining the future of the species amidst environmental toxicity. In the context of the rhetoric of male decline, white heterosexual masculinity becomes an endangered species. And thank you all for listening.